That is what I saw near Denver city limits with Lakewood along Colfax Avenue. People can't even wait on the bus without having to worry about stepping on somebody who's laying on the sidewalk. That's the reality of Denver these days. It's sad, no doubt. That being said, homelessness isn't as present in this part of town as it is in the central parts of town that I've shown you so far in my Denver series, but you can still find it here and there. I also filmed this in the summer of 2022, which was a year and a half prior to me uploading this video. Since then, the number of homeless in the city has only expanded by more than 1,000. So, it's probably more present than what you're going to see in this video. I've talked a lot about the homeless in Denver already along with the migrant workers, so this video will be about a different topic, that being the poverty, and Denver hides its poverty much better than it hides its homelessness. What we're about to see in this video is actually the part of town with the highest poverty rate. This will be my 5th video on the city of Denver. We'll be going through the Villa Park and West Colfax neighborhoods. Before we dive into those neighborhoods though, we're going to check out the Sun Valley neighborhood, which is by far and away the smallest of the 3 in terms of population. Currently, we're heading north on Federal Boulevard from the 6th Avenue Freeway. Federal Boulevard serves as the neighborhood boundary between Sun Valley and Villa Park West Colfax. Sun Valley happens to be Denver's poorest neighborhood. Sun Valley is about 2 miles west from the State Capitol building. According to the Denver Housing Authority, 94% of the housing in Sun Valley is subsidized. The DHA additionally claims that 80% of Sun Valley residents lives under the poverty line. The public housing in Sun Valley, though, looks nothing like what I'm used to seeing in the Midwest. Check out my video on Ford Heights to see an extreme example of public housing going wrong in the Chicago area. Obviously, those were abandoned, so yeah, an extreme example, but still, some cool shit. Alright, well, back to Denver's Sun Valley neighborhood. The most notable thing in Sun Valley would be Empower Field at Mile High. In the foreground, you can see some of Sun Valley's public housing, and they don't look much different than any other post-2010 apartment building. Now we're looking south, and where the large square grass area is, used to sit some old, crumbly-looking Section 8 housing units. Apparently there were 333 apartments in this cluster, but yeah, as you can tell, they were starting to look pretty shabby. Denver is calling this new park the Sun Valley Riverfront Park, and it's an effort from the city to make its most poverty-stricken community more desirable. On the flip side, it's Empower Field at Mile High, everybody! The stadium replaced the old Mile High Stadium back in 2001, as it was built in the parking lot of the old one. The NFL's Denver Broncos play their home games here, and just like with all of the other pro sports teams in Denver, the Broncos gain an advantage when visiting teams come to play, as opponents aren't used to the high altitude. Over the years, there's been certain athletes who have been diagnosed with what is called a sickle cell trait, and it has something to do with their bloodstream. I don't know. I mean, you can go look it up if you want, but it eliminates their availability to be able to play whenever they come to Denver. So I'd be shocked if Denver is ever able to hold a Super Bowl because of that reason right there, but maybe I'm wrong. Only the future will tell. Now, the original Mile High Stadium was built here in 1948 in what used to be industrial space. The Great Depression killed a lot of the industry here in Denver, so the industrial sector of the Denver economy took a huge hit in the 30s and 40s. As a result, the original Mile High Stadium was built in place of a lot of the blighted industry for the Denver Bears, which was a minor league baseball team. This was way before the Colorado Rockies of the major leagues came into town in 1993, but a part of the plan for the original Mile High Stadium was to attract a major league baseball team. However, it wasn't long after the original stadium's construction until the NFL's Denver Broncos made Mile High Stadium their home turf. Now more about the neighborhood, as Sun Valley went from being residential to industrial back in 1925. During the decades leading up to the rezoning of Sun Valley, the majority ethnic group in the neighborhood went from being Jewish to Hispanic. At the time of the switch, it said that many of the homes were in terrible shape. Right across the river from Sun Valley was a neighborhood called Auraria that was prone to flooding from the South Platte River, and Auraria shared similar economic status with Sun Valley. Today, most of Auraria is parking lots. You have the theme park located on the north side, along with Ball Arena, where the Denver Nuggets play, and the Colorado Avalanche. There's also the Metropolitan State University of Denver, which on campus has a small preserved residential block that includes original homes from the Auraria neighborhood, so at least there's that. Well, I talked more about the Auraria neighborhood in my downtown Denver video. It's one of the oldest neighborhoods, if not the oldest, in the city of Denver, so go check out that video once you're done watching this one, of course, if you haven't already. Well, in the late 1920s, Denver built their first public housing project in Sun Valley, and the neighborhood has been known for being a Section 8 neighborhood ever since. The neighborhood was never in an ideal spot for residential zoning, as it had the river on the east side, railroad tracks on the west side, and eventually I-25 was constructed to the east and northeast of Sun Valley, creating another barrier between Sun Valley and other parts of the city. Makes a great spot for a stadium and large parking lot, though. Well, let's take a look at the economic stats for Sun Valley. Today, the neighborhood is home to only 1,100 residents. You can expect that number to jump up once all of the construction and redesign of the neighborhood is done. I'm guessing that there were many more people who lived in this neighborhood 10 years ago, but they ended up getting relocated because their buildings were torn down by the city. The median household income is only $26,000 per year. At the same time, the median value of owner-occupied housing units is $535,000. And you're just saying, wait, what? $535,000 median value of owner-occupied housing units with $26,000 per year median household income? How does that make sense? Well, keep in mind that this is Denver, and also there are only a handful of owner-occupied housing units like condos, townhomes, or single-family homes within the Sun Valley neighborhood. Remember, 94% of the housing in Sun Valley is subsidized housing, so the key words in that stat would be owner-occupied housing, in which there is very little of it here, but because it is Denver, a very expensive real estate market, that's why that number is so high despite the median household income being extremely low. Anyway, most people who live here are paying the cheapest rent in all of the Denver metro area, as once again they live in Section 8 housing. Lastly, the poverty rate is 80%. That poverty rate stat is not a typo, and I did not misspeak. It is 80%. The crime rates for Sun Valley don't look all that great either. 1,700 for every 100,000 residents for violent crime, and 8,500 for every 100,000 in property crime. Since it is Denver, most of the property crime comes in the form of car thefts. The city of Denver, let alone the Denver metro area, let alone the state of Colorado, is among the leaders in the nation for car theft rate. The numbers for Sun Valley are a little bit inflated because only 1,100 people live in the neighborhood currently, but that's what you have to expect when you live in a neighborhood that's full of Section 8 housing, unfortunately so. Well, there's not much left to see in Sun Valley, so let's look at the other neighborhoods featured in this video.
Yeah, I'm from Villa Park. Villa Park. Villa Park. Park.
Nope.
Villa Park sits south of West Colfax and west of Sun Valley. West of Villa Park is the separate suburban city of Lakewood. And I lied. I'm not completely ready to start talking about Villa Park yet because this is still a relevant thing to mention about the public housing and how the rent prices get set on that. Also, there will be some more public housing that we come across in the West Colfax neighborhood later in this video, so here's a table provided by the DHA on their website. The monthly rent is highlighted in yellow, while the income that the rent gets based on is in red. Alright, so about Villa Park. The land that the neighborhood sits on today was bought by developers all the way back in 1871. The original plans for the area was for it to be developed with lakes and specialized landscaping, being done by Frederick Law Olmsted of all people. Olmsted designed Central Park in New York City, so he was kind of a big deal back in those days. He never made it out to Denver though, so the plans fell through. What we call Villa Park today ended up being a cattle brokerage. In 1878, the land was sold to Helen Barnum Hurd Butchell. She was the daughter of circus owner P.T. Barnum. From then until the 1950s, the neighborhood slowly developed into what it is today. In fact, here's an aerial view of Villa Park from 1933. You can see that the eastern portion of the neighborhood, or the part that's closest to downtown Denver, was developed first, while the parts of the western portion had yet to be touched. There's also a lot of empty grid streets, so the streets must have been brand new at this time. Well, here's some labels added to the 1933 aerial view so you can get a better idea of where things are. Now, back to blank, and now an aerial view from 2023. Nearly a 100-year difference. The northern boundary of the Villa Park neighborhood is Dry Gulch. There's another gulch that goes through the neighborhood called Lakewood Gulch. Both gulches, or creeks, have pedestrian paths that follow them, which adds to Denver's outdoorsy culture. Villa Park is mostly made up of single-family homes, although in recent years there's been denser forms of residential zoning that have popped up here and there, such as apartment buildings and condos. It's a nice little neighborhood, honestly. It kind of seems like an underrated part of Denver, and I'm guessing the residents of Villa Park want it to stay that way. The worst thing about Villa Park would obviously be the high cost of housing, whether it's through rent or mortgage, and that's shared throughout the entire Denver metro area. When it comes to the economic stats, Villa Park isn't necessarily Sun Valley. Not close at all, really, but it's also far away from being Cherry Creek Village. Just under 10,000 people live in the neighborhood today, with the median household income being $56,000. 30% of adults 25 and older hold a bachelor's degree or higher, and the median value of owner-occupied housing units is $414,000, with the poverty rate being 25%. The crime rates aren't all that bad either for it being a neighborhood with above-average poverty. Maybe that makes Villa Park that much more ideal. Violent crime comes in at 488 for every 100,000 residents, while property crime is about 3,200 for every 100,000 residents. For Denver standards, those numbers look pretty good actually, despite them still being above the national average. In fact, there are neighborhoods in Denver with a much higher median household income that have twice as bad of a crime rate, so Villa Park looks really good in that matter. Lastly, Villa Park is known for having a strong representation of Latinos among its population, with 64% of the residents being Hispanic. In a little bit, we'll jump on over to the West Colfax neighborhood, which has more Section 8 housing, but it also has more gentrification once you head north of Colfax. The term gentrification is conflicting to me because in the big city near where I'm from, you could say that gentrification in Detroit is a good thing. Here in Denver, you could say that it's a bad thing because of the already high costs of living. Anyway, more of that to come later in the video. As we cross over the Dry Gulch, we enter West Colfax. It's the third neighborhood featured in this video. It's a little bit different than Villa Park is, and it's a lot different than Sun Valley is. West Colfax these days has a lot of newer apartments and condos. There's also some Section 8 housing here and there throughout the neighborhood. Despite the higher residential density, it still has plenty of single-family homes like what we saw in Villa Park. Owner-occupied housing units in West Colfax are valued higher than those of what we saw in Villa Park. The median household income is also higher in West Colfax, as young professionals with college degrees have moved into the gentrified housing of the neighborhood. There's still a large percentage of West Colfax residents who live under the poverty line, creating a situation where there's a big gap between the rich and poor in this particular neighborhood. Today, just over 11,000 people call West Colfax home. As many as 59% of adults 25 and older hold a bachelor's degree or higher. The median value of owner-occupied housing units is $714,000, with all of those numbers looking all good and dandy. The poverty rate sticks out like a sore thumb, though, with 34% of West Colfax residents living under the poverty line. So yeah, a big gap between the rich and poor here in West Colfax. Most of the newer and fancier residential units here were built within the last decade, And as we go along in the video, I'll compare some street view shots from 10 years ago to what we see here today to illustrate some of that change. If you saw the graphic, we just passed by the Westridge Homes, which is operated by the Denver Housing Authority, so it's low-income housing. That being said, the poor never moved away from West Colfax, despite the newer and fancier residential units that have been built here. A lot of the fancier places in the neighborhood are north of Colfax, near Sloan Lake Park. Currently, we're south of Colfax. Anyway, despite the wealthier tax base that West Colfax sees over Villa Park, the poverty rate is also higher in West Colfax than what we saw in Villa Park. That's not the only negative stat that West Colfax has that outpaces Villa Park either, as the crime rates in this neighborhood are much worse. The violent crime rate is over 1,100 for every 100,000 residents, while the property crime rate hovers around 4,500 for every 100,000 residents. That being said, here's a side-by-side comparison of the stats for both Villa Park and West Colfax. Now that we've talked about what it's like here today, let's talk about some of the interesting backstory of West Colfax. Some of it has to do with Colfax Avenue. So the West Colfax neighborhood is obviously named after Colfax Avenue. How did Colfax Avenue get its name? Well, west of downtown, Colfax Avenue used to be called Golden Road due to the fact that the street connected downtown Denver with the city of Golden to the west. Pretty simple. Grand Avenue was another name that was given to modern-day Colfax Avenue in other parts of the city. In 1868, the street was renamed to Colfax Avenue after Schuyler Colfax, who was the vice president to Ulysses S. Grant. Schuyler vacationed in Denver in 1865 and fell in love with the city. During that time, Schuyler was a congressman from Indiana. Some historians believe that Denver renaming the main street to Colfax Avenue would help Colorado's cause into becoming an official state by kissing up to Schuyler Colfax. Renaming Golden Road and Grand Avenue into Colfax didn't really help, though, as Colorado didn't become a state until 1876, which is 8 years after the name change of the road. Nonetheless, the name of Colfax Avenue stuck. Back to the history in a bit, as this is considered to be a desirable area for young professionals, being only a few blocks away from Sloan Lake. Over the last 10 years, this area has been overtaken with luxury condos. To show the transformation, here's a street view shot of this same street from 2011. Yeah, how crazy is that? Prior to the last several years, the West Colfax neighborhood saw very little investment for decades. Alright, so Schuyler Colfax was popular through his charisma throughout Denver, so that also helped the cause of Colfax Avenue being named as such. Schuyler Colfax loved Colorado, and Colorado loved Schuyler Colfax. It was a love-love relationship. Schuyler believed that Colorado was the richest land under the sun. Whatever the reason was for the street being renamed to Colfax, it seems appropriate as the first legislation for Colorado was drafted by Schuyler. Schuyler, however, was big in helping Colorado become a state. Before Colfax even visited Colorado, he introduced a bill in Congress in 1859 to organize what he called the Territory of Kelowna along the eastern slope of the Rockies, cutting out land from parts that originally belonged to the Kansas, Nebraska, and New Mexico territories. The eastern square shape of Kelowna ended up becoming the boundaries for the state of Colorado. The name of Kelowna was favored by the settlers of the area at the time, taken from the Spanish name of Columbus. The new bill wasn't supported, however, due to slavery playing a huge role in the political landscape at the time, and votes heavily went against the creation of a new free territory, or an anti-slave territory. Over time, however, Schuyler ended up changing the name on the bill from Kelowna to Colorado. So yeah, that's why Colfax Avenue is named Colfax Avenue. The street has always been Denver's main commercial thoroughfare from the beginning. Back in the day, it was the main route to get to the mountains. Development in this part of town started in the late 19th century, carrying on through the 1950s. Back to the aerial shot from 1933, as you can see that not only the eastern areas towards downtown Denver are more filled out at this point, but pretty much every block along Colfax is filled out too. Even the parts further west, where the blocks become emptier the further away that you get from Colfax. Now more about the West Colfax neighborhood specifically. The area was annexed by Denver sometime right before the start of the 20th century. Originally, West Colfax had a strong Jewish community. Almost all of the population in the neighborhood was either Jewish or Latino around the 1920s and 30s. There were as many as 11 synagogues in West Colfax at one point as well. Well, in the time period from the 1920s through the 40s, the neighborhood started to change. Denver became a bigger city, and Colfax Avenue was widened to accommodate heavier car traffic. Businesses then started to favor automobile traffic over pedestrian traffic, and the strip of Colfax ended up being full of hotels, motels, restaurants, and clubs. Once the freeway system was built, however, traffic passing through on Colfax lowered significantly, and the neighborhood saw some decay in the later half of the 20th century, evolving into being one of the poorer neighborhoods in all of Denver. It continued to stay that way all the way until recently, as we continue to drive around and we continue to see luxury condos. Once again, all of the luxury condos have been built within the last 10 years. Despite the millions of dollars in recent investments as we drive on Colfax right now, you can still kind of soak in the rougher, low-end commercial retail look that has been present on this stretch of the thoroughfare for a long time. Well, in the 1950s, a Jewish exodus occurred, if you will, where they moved away from being in one central area on the west side of Denver to being spread throughout the entire Denver metro area. Otherwise, Latinos have always had a strong representation of the West Colfax neighborhood. Of course, Colfax Avenue was once named by Playboy magazine as being the longest, wickedest street in all of America. Most of the prostitution and drugs were found on the East Colfax corridor rather than West Colfax, although there was some of it along West Colfax too. Otherwise, Colfax was full of abandoned buildings, and overall, it just had an ugly industrial streetscape from the time that I-70 was built until the recent population and economic boom that Denver saw in the 2010s. Other things to mention about the West Colfax neighborhood would be that before it was annexed by Denver, there were actually two cities here. The first one being Brooklyn in a small area between Decatur Street and the South Platte River, the other city being called Colfax, and it took up the entire West Colfax neighborhood, which was incorporated in 1891. Both the city of Brooklyn and the city of Colfax were started because there were groups of residents who were trying to avoid being annexed by Denver, but obviously those attempts failed. Also, the neighborhood was originally made up of small and rather cheap housing, mostly for factory workers. There were exceptions though, such as some homes along Stewart Street, which I didn't drive on when I was here. I ended up driving on the street next to Stewart Street. Anyway, here is a Google Street View image of some of the Victorian mansions that you can find on Stewart Street in West Colfax. Well, anyway, this happens to be the location that I saw this. So yeah, anyway, it is now that time. What did we learn in this video? We learned that you can't always expect to wait on a bus in Denver without worrying about having to step on somebody who's sleeping on the sidewalk, and you can't always trust when walking around West Colfax at night that you won't get stalked, but you can always trust Chris's livability score. Since I went through 3 neighborhoods in this video, I'll be listing the scores for each category through a graphic. When it comes to the education, all 3 neighborhoods lie within the boundaries for Denver North High School. Denver North is located in the Highland neighborhood northwest of downtown. It's not the worst high school in Denver, but it's also not the best. Math scores come in below average, whereas reading and science are right on par with the state averages. Education gets a 9 out of 20 for all 3. Crime is pretty bad in both Sun Valley and West Colfax, not so much in Villa Park. The scores are ranked accordingly down below. The economy is not a problem in Denver really, but because these neighborhoods are the poorest in the city, that will rank them a tad bit lower than some of the other neighborhoods and districts that I've covered in Denver so far, with Sun Valley obviously being the lowest of the 3. Recreational opportunities are there for those who seek it in all 3 neighborhoods. There are pedestrian paths along the creeks that run through the area, plus you have the Rocky Mountains nearby to the west, so 13 out of 20 for all 3. The history score varies between the 3 neighborhoods. Sun Valley has some history, with it once being residential, then it becoming industrial, and then Mile High Stadium and its giant parking lot taking things over. West Colfax obviously is the leader in the history score of the 3. I rank them as such down below. The winner in amenities has to be West Colfax, right? I mean, Sun Valley has Mile High Stadium, but that's more so a city amenity than a neighborhood amenity. Truth is that most people who live in Sun Valley won't be able to afford a Broncos game anyway, as unfortunately their median household income is $26,000 per year, so I don't see how having Mile High Stadium next door is a benefit to Sun Valley residents. Down below is the amenity score for all 3 neighborhoods. Cost of living is last, and Sun Valley is cheap, but it's also not a reality for most people to be able to expect to get accepted into Denver's public housing within a convenient time frame, with the super long list that comes with not only Denver's public housing, but every city's public housing. Villa Park is obviously the more reasonably priced neighborhood between it and West Colfax, so I ranked the scores for each neighborhood as such. All in all, Villa Park scored 72 out of 140, West Colfax scored 69 out of 140, and Sun Valley scored 64 out of 140 on the Chris Livability score. And here's where they all rank out of the Denver neighborhoods that I've gone through so far. Final thoughts here, as it was quite surprising to me to learn that these 3 neighborhoods in Denver had the highest poverty rates, because it's not what I'm used to seeing in terms of a neighborhood of a larger city that has the highest poverty rate. But maybe if I came out here 10 years prior, before all of the gentrification and new investments came through, maybe it would have looked more run down. But Denver hides its poverty well. Maybe they can start putting some of that work towards housing the homeless. Maybe crime will go down too if they do that, just a thought. Also, I always hear people talking about how Colfax Avenue is the hood in Denver. I didn't really see a hood in this video, despite the high poverty rates. Everything looked pretty clean overall, much cleaner than what I saw in the downtown area and in the neighborhoods that surround downtown. In fact, I feel like the only way that one could be able to tell that this is Denver's most poverty-stricken area is by watching this video and by looking at the stat sheets. That being said, if you enjoyed this video, you might enjoy seeing the other videos in my Denver playlist, which is in the top left corner of the screen.